You were the greatest mistake of my reign. The words fell across the royal hall, and for one long moment, nobody breathed. Elena Carter stood beneath the crystal chandeliers with her hands folded calmly in front of her, her pale face giving away almost nothing. Beside her stood 4-year-old Noah, the young heir to the kingdom, holding a small wooden toy in both hands. Across the marble floor, Adrian Blackwood sat beneath the royal crest, every inch the Alpha King the court had learned to obey. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his black royal suit immaculate, and his grey eyes fixed on Elena with a coldness she had never seen before. The council watched from both sides of the chamber. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked relieved. Victoria Hale, seated among the senior nobles, lowered her gaze as though she were hiding a satisfied expression. Elena had known this moment might come. She had simply hoped Adrian would remember everything that had existed between them before he chose his crown. For 4 years, she had lived inside a palace that never completely accepted her. She had learned which corridors were quiet in the morning, which servants could be trusted, and which council members believed an Omega had no place beside the king. Through all of it, she had stayed because she believed Adrian saw more in her than a title. She believed the man behind the crown cared about the family they had built. Now, standing before the entire council, she understood how badly she had misjudged him. Adrian rose slowly from his chair. "The kingdom needs stability," he said. "It cannot be governed by personal weakness." Elena looked at him. "And you believe I am that weakness?" His silence answered first. Then came the words that would follow him for years. "You were a mistake." Noah looked up at his mother. He was too young to understand the politics surrounding them, but old enough to understand that his mother's face had changed. Elena lowered herself slightly and rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It is all right," she whispered. Then she straightened and looked at Adrian again. There were tears in her eyes now, but they did not fall. "Then you will never have to see your mistake again." Adrian's expression shifted. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "Elena." She did not wait. She took Noah's hand and walked toward the enormous oak doors. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. Even the council seemed to understand that something irreversible had just happened. Behind her, Adrian remained standing beneath the royal crest, watching the woman he had just rejected disappear with the child who carried his blood and his future. That evening, Elena returned to her rooms and packed only what she could carry. She took Noah's warm coat, a few personal belongings, her mother's old bracelet, and the small amount of money she had saved over the years. She left the jewels. She left the royal gifts. She left everything that belonged to the palace. Before sunrise, she would disappear with the heir, leaving Adrian with an empty room, a silent kingdom, and a question he would not be able to answer for years: what had he really lost when he called her a mistake? For years earlier, before the palace learned to call Elena an outsider, she had believed there was a place for her beside Adrian. She had entered the royal household quietly, without a powerful family name or a circle of influential allies, and she had never expected the crown to make her important. What mattered to her was the man behind it. Adrian had been difficult to understand at first. He spoke carefully, kept his emotions guarded, and seemed more comfortable in council chambers than at family dinners. Elena noticed the details other people ignored. He preferred black coffee in the morning. He stayed awake before difficult council meetings. He became unusually quiet whenever someone mentioned his late mother. She never forced him to explain. She simply stayed near enough that he did not have to face those moments alone. Slowly, the distance between them changed. Adrian began looking for her after long meetings. He would find her in the palace library with a book beside her and ask what she was reading. Sometimes they walked through the winter gardens without discussing politics at all. Those were the moments Elena treasured most because Adrian was not the Alpha King then. He was simply Adrian. When Noah was born, everything changed again. Adrian held his son for the first time with an expression Elena had never seen before. The powerful king who could command an entire kingdom seemed completely uncertain as he looked down at the tiny child. Elena smiled. He knows your voice already. Adrian looked at her. How would you know? Because he stops fussing whenever you speak. Adrian gave a quiet smile, and for a moment, Elena believed they had finally become a family. But the palace had its own opinion. The council wanted a queen with a powerful family behind her. They believed Elena's position beside Adrian weakened the crown. Victoria Hale became the clearest example of what they wanted. She came from an old and influential family, understood royal traditions, and knew exactly how to speak to people who believed power should remain within a certain circle. Victoria never openly insulted Elena. She was more careful than that. Instead, she asked polite questions that made others wonder whether Elena truly belonged. Does the Omega understand the Northern alliances? She would ask. Or, perhaps the king should have someone with more political experience beside him. Adrian heard those comments. Elena knew he did. But he rarely challenged them. His silence became the first crack in the life they had built. Over time, Adrian spent more evenings with the council and fewer with Elena and Noah. He began treating every family decision as though it were a matter of royal strategy. Elena tried to understand. She told herself that leadership was difficult and that Adrian carried responsibilities no one else could see. Then one evening, while she was helping Noah with a wooden puzzle, Adrian entered the room and watched them quietly. Noah looked up. Papa, look. I made the castle. Adrian smiled faintly. Elena watched him kneel beside their son. For several minutes, the three of them looked like an ordinary family. Elena wanted to believe that moment would last. She did not know that outside the room, Victoria and the council were already discussing the future of the throne. And they were beginning to believe that removing Elena would be the easiest way to control it. Victoria Hale never needed to raise her voice to change the atmosphere of a room. She understood that in the royal court, a carefully chosen question could do more damage to trust than an accusation ever could. Over the following months, she became a familiar presence beside Adrian, attending council meetings, reviewing reports, and offering advice that always seemed reasonable. Elena noticed the pattern, but she refused to compete for Adrian's attention. She believed their family should not become a contest. That belief became harder to hold when the council began questioning Noah's future. One afternoon, Elena was walking through the east corridor with Noah when two advisors stepped aside as they passed. Their conversation stopped immediately. Noah looked up at his mother. Why did they stop talking? Elena smiled gently. Some people forget that children notice everything. She continued walking, but the uneasiness remained. Later that evening, Adrian arrived home from a long council meeting and found Elena waiting in the library. Noah was asleep upstairs. A warm fire filled the room with soft light. We need to talk, Adrian said. Elena closed her book. About what? He placed a folder on the table. The Northern Territories. Elena looked at it, confused. I have never been involved with their council. Adrian's expression remained guarded. Then why have several people reported that you have been receiving private messages from them? Elena stared at him. Because they sent invitations to a charitable winter program. I declined. Adrian opened the folder. Inside were copies of letters, but several details appeared altered. Elena recognized the names but not the wording. These are not the letters I received. Adrian looked at her. Are you certain? Yes. She pushed the folder back toward him. You know me better than this. He did not answer immediately. That silence hurt. Elena slowly stood. Adrian, if you believe I am hiding something, ask me. Do not bring me papers created by people who already want me gone. Adrian's expression softened for a moment, but the doubt remained. The council is concerned. About your influence over Noah. Elena's face became still. My influence? They believe the heir should be raised according to royal tradition. Elena understood what they were really saying. They did not want her raising her own son. They wanted access to him. Before she could respond, Victoria entered the library. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, although her expression suggested she had expected to arrive at exactly that moment. She looked at Elena, then at Adrian. "There is another matter." She placed a second document on the table. "The council has discovered that Noah carries an unusual hereditary marker connected to the oldest royal bloodlines." Elena felt her heart sink. Adrian looked at the report. "What does this mean?" Victoria answered carefully. "It means the child is more important to the kingdom than we previously understood." Elena stepped closer to Noah's future, even though he was not in the room. "He is a child," she said. "Not a political symbol." Victoria smiled faintly. "That is exactly why everyone must be careful." Elena looked at Adrian. She expected him to defend their son. Instead, he remained silent, studying the report. In that quiet moment, Elena understood the real danger. Victoria did not need to take anything from her. She only needed Adrian to doubt her long enough for the council to take control. Elena walked out of the library without another word. Behind her, Adrian remained beside the table, staring at the report that had just turned his family into a question of power. And somewhere in the palace, Victoria already knew the next question she would place in his mind. That night, Elena stood alone beside the nursery window and watched snow settle across the palace gardens. Down the corridor, Noah was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the adults around him had begun treating his future like a political decision. Elena placed a hand against the cold glass and tried to quiet the worry inside her. She had spent years believing the palace could protect her family. Now she was beginning to understand that the palace could also become the greatest threat to their peace. The next morning, she went to see the royal physician. He was an older man named Samuel Brooks, trusted by the royal household for decades. When Elena showed him the report Victoria had presented, his expression changed. "This information should never have reached the council without a full examination," he said. Elena looked at him carefully. "What does the report mean?" Samuel lowered his voice. "Your son carries a hereditary marker associated with the oldest branches of the royal bloodline. It is rare, but it does not mean he is in danger." Elena felt some relief. "Then why is everyone so interested?" Samuel looked toward the closed door. "Because bloodlines create influence. Some families may see Noah as a path to greater power within the kingdom." Elena's face became serious. "Can Adrian protect him?" Samuel hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "The king has the authority," he said carefully. "But authority is only useful when the person holding it knows whom to trust." Elena thanked him and returned to her rooms. She had barely closed the door when she found a small envelope beneath a book on her desk. There was no name on it. Inside was a single handwritten message. "Do not tell the king about the heir's hereditary marker." Elena read the sentence twice. Then she turned the paper over. Nothing else. Her heart began to pound. Someone inside the palace knew she had spoken with Samuel. Someone was watching her. That evening, Adrian asked Elena to meet him in the private study. He looked exhausted. The royal documents on his desk had been left untouched. "I need you to trust me," he said. Elena almost smiled at the irony. "I have spent 4 years trying to do exactly that." Adrian lowered his eyes. "I know." "Do you?" she asked quietly. "Because every time the council questions me, you look at me as if you are wondering whether they are right." Adrian took a slow breath. "I do not want to lose my family." Elena looked at him. "Then stop treating us like a political problem." For a moment, Adrian seemed ready to answer. Instead, the door opened. Victoria entered with several council members. "Your Majesty, we need your decision." Elena turned toward them. Victoria held another document. The council recommends that Noah be placed under formal royal supervision. Elena's expression changed immediately. He is 4 years old. He needs his parents, not a committee. Victoria remained calm. This is about protecting the future of the kingdom. Adrian looked from Victoria to Elena. The room fell silent. Elena waited for him to choose. She wanted him to say that Noah was their son before he was an heir. She wanted him to remember the man she had once trusted. But Adrian's hesitation returned. Elena saw it clearly. She did not argue. She simply understood. If Adrian could not protect their family while she remained inside the palace, she would have to find another way. Later that night, while the palace slept, Elena opened an old wooden chest and began preparing for a journey she had never wanted to take. She packed Noah's winter clothes, a few personal belongings, her mother's bracelet, and enough money to begin somewhere far from the capital. She left the royal jewels untouched. She left the gowns. She left every symbol of the life she had been given. Before closing the chest, she looked once toward the sleeping room where Noah rested. Her decision was no longer about pride. It was about giving her son a childhood where no one would measure his worth by the blood in his veins. And before sunrise, Elena would make the hardest choice of her life. Elena left the palace before sunrise, carrying Noah's hand in hers as they walked through the quiet eastern corridor. The palace was still asleep, its marble floors reflecting the faint blue light coming through the tall windows. Noah wore a warm winter coat and carried a small wooden toy under one arm. He looked up at his mother with sleepy curiosity. "Where are we going?" Elena smiled gently. "Somewhere peaceful." She did not tell him that she did not know exactly where that place would be. She only knew it had to be far from the council, far from the rumors, and far from anyone who saw a 4-year-old child as a symbol of royal power. At the private entrance, Elena paused. For one final moment, she looked back at the palace. She remembered arriving there years earlier with hope in her heart. She remembered Adrian's quiet smile when Noah was born. She remembered evenings in the library and mornings in the winter garden. She also remembered the silence that had slowly grown between them. Elena turned away. She and Noah left without taking a single royal carriage. She carried only a small travel bag, her mother's bracelet, a little cash, and the document Samuel had given her. Several hours later, Adrian entered the breakfast hall and immediately noticed that Elena and Noah were missing. He looked toward the empty chair where Noah usually sat. "Where are they?" he asked. No one answered immediately. A servant finally stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Lady Elena left before sunrise." Adrian's expression changed. "Where did she go?" "We do not know." Adrian stood still. The answer made no sense. Elena would never leave without telling him. At least, that was what he had once believed. He went directly to her rooms. The wardrobe was nearly empty. Her royal jewelry remained untouched. The expensive gowns remained exactly where they had been. On the desk sat a small photograph of Adrian, Elena, and Noah taken during a winter celebration. Adrian picked it up carefully. On the back, Elena had written 3 words. "We were a family." He closed his eyes. The words felt heavier than any accusation. Then he noticed an envelope beside the photograph. His hands tightened around the paper as he opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Adrian, I am not leaving because I stopped caring about you. I am leaving because I cannot allow Noah to grow up believing that his worth depends on the crown. You once told the council that personal feelings could not interfere with the future of the kingdom. I believe you meant it. So I am removing myself from that future. Please do not search for us unless you are ready to understand why we had to leave." Adrian read the letter twice. Then he looked toward the empty doorway. For the first time, he understood that Elena had not disappeared to punish him. She had disappeared because she no longer believed the palace was safe for their family. He returned to the council chamber and found Victoria waiting. She began to speak, but Adrian raised his hand. "Do you know where Elena went?" Victoria hesitated. That hesitation was enough to change something inside him. Adrian looked at her carefully. "I asked you a simple question." Victoria lowered her eyes. "No, Your Majesty." Adrian said nothing more. But for the first time, doubt was no longer pointed toward Elena. It was pointed toward the people who had spent years telling him not to trust her. And somewhere far beyond the palace, Elena and Noah were beginning a new life, unaware that Adrian had finally started asking the right questions. For years passed after Elena left the palace, and Adrian learned that an empty room could become louder than any council chamber. He never stopped searching, but every trail disappeared before it led anywhere certain. Elena had used no royal carriage, no palace account, and no official travel record. She had taken Noah far beyond the reach of the kingdom's usual networks, choosing ordinary roads and quiet towns where nobody cared about titles. Adrian remained king, but the crown no longer felt like the privilege it once had. Every year, on Noah's birthday, he found himself looking toward the empty seat at the family table. He never knew where his son was celebrating, what stories Noah heard at bedtime, or whether Elena still remembered the man she had once trusted. Meanwhile, Elena had built a quiet life in a small mountain community nearly 300 miles from the capital. She rented a modest wooden cabin surrounded by pine trees and snow-covered hills. She worked at a local bookstore during the week and helped at the town library on weekends. Noah grew up without royal ceremonies. He learned to read beside a fireplace, played in the snow with other children, and believed his mother was simply the strongest person he knew. Elena never spoke cruelly about Adrian. When Noah asked about his father, she always answered carefully. "Your father is a man who made mistakes," she would say. "People can change, but they have to choose to." Noah accepted the answer because he trusted her. One winter morning, 4 years after Elena's departure, Adrian received a report from a regional official. A woman matching Elena's description had been seen near a small mountain town. She had been there for several years. She had a young son. Adrian read the report without moving. Then he noticed the child's age. 4 years old. His heart began to race. There was only one conclusion that made sense. He immediately traveled north, but he did not bring a royal procession. He took only one trusted driver and a simple winter coat. The journey took nearly 2 days. Snow covered the roads as the mountains grew higher, and every mile seemed to carry him farther from the world he understood. When he reached the town, an elderly innkeeper recognized the photograph of Elena. "She stayed here years ago," the woman said. She asked for directions to a quiet place where she could raise her son. Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you know where she is now?" The innkeeper pointed toward a narrow road leading deeper into the mountains. "There is a cabin about 20 miles from here." Adrian thanked her and continued alone. Near sunset, he finally saw a small wooden house surrounded by snow-covered pine trees. Warm light glowed through the windows. A child's laughter drifted into the cold evening air. Adrian stopped several yards from the cabin. Through the glass, he saw Elena sitting beside a young boy at a wooden table. The boy had dark hair and unmistakable gray eyes. Adrian did not need a royal record to know who he was. For 4 years, he had searched for his missing Omega. In that single moment, he realized he had also been searching for the son he had never been allowed to know. He stood quietly in the snow, wondering whether the family he had lost would ever allow him to come home. Adrian stood outside the cabin for several minutes before finally walking toward the door. He had faced entire councils without hesitation, yet the simple thought of knocking made his hands feel strangely heavy. Through the window, he watched Elena help Noah fit the final piece into a wooden puzzle. The boy looked up at her with a bright smile, and Elena smiled back. Adrian had missed 4 years of moments like that. Birthdays. First words. First steps. Ordinary mornings that should have belonged to all three of them. He finally raised his hand and knocked softly. Elena looked toward the door. Her expression changed the instant she saw him through the glass. She stood slowly and walked across the room. Noah followed her, curious. Elena opened the door only halfway, allowing the warm light from the cabin to spill onto the snow. Adrian. His name sounded different in her voice now. There was no anger in it, but there was no warmth either. Elena, he replied. For a moment, neither knew what to say. Then Noah stepped beside his mother and looked up at the stranger standing outside. Adrian's eyes settled on the boy. Gray eyes. Dark hair. The same small crease between the eyebrows that Adrian had seen in old photographs of himself as a child. His son. 4 years old. Alive. Happy. Unaware of the kingdom waiting beyond the mountains. Who is he? Noah asked. Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. His name is Adrian. Noah studied him carefully. Are you from the palace? Adrian nodded. Yes. The boy tilted his head. Are you the king? Adrian swallowed. Yes. Noah looked at Elena, then back at Adrian. Are you the king who made my mother sad? The question was innocent. There was no accusation in the child's voice. That made it harder to answer. Adrian looked at Elena. She did not speak for him. She did not protect him from the question. She simply waited. Adrian lowered himself slightly so he was closer to Noah's height. Yes, he said quietly. I made a mistake. Noah considered the answer. Did you say sorry? Adrian looked at Elena again. 4 years ago, he would have answered with certainty. He would have expected obedience. Now he simply said, not properly. Noah nodded as though that made sense. Then he returned to the table and continued working on his puzzle. Elena stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Why are you here? She asked. Adrian looked toward the cabin. Because I finally understand what I lost. Elena's expression remained guarded. You lost us 4 years ago. I know. And you came because you found your heir. Adrian shook his head. I came because I found my family. Elena looked away toward the mountains. Those are not the same thing. Adrian knew she was right. He had spent years thinking like a king. Everything had been measured by duty, bloodline, succession, and reputation. He had forgotten that Noah was a child before he was an heir, and Elena was a woman before she was an omega. I will not ask you to return, he said. Elena looked back at him. You could. I could, Adrian admitted. But I will not. He reached into his coat and removed the royal signet. Instead of wearing it, he held it loosely in his hand. This gave me authority over a kingdom. It never gave me the right to decide your life. Elena stared at him in silence. For the first time since he arrived, Adrian understood that finding them was not the victory he had imagined. The real test had just begun. Adrian returned to the capital alone, and for the first time in years, the palace felt less like a home and more like a question he could no longer avoid. He walked into the council chamber without his ceremonial crown, carrying the royal signet in his hand. Victoria and the senior advisors were already waiting. They expected him to announce that Elena and Noah had been found and that the heir would soon return to the palace. Instead, Adrian placed the signet on the table and looked at every person in the room. I found Elena, he said. And I found my son. The room fell silent. Victoria's expression remained composed, but her eyes changed. Adrian continued. I also found evidence that several reports presented to me were incomplete or deliberately misleading. One advisor began to speak, but Adrian raised his hand. I am not interested in excuses. I am interested in the truth. He ordered every document concerning Elena, Noah, the Northern Territories, and the hereditary report to be reviewed independently. The results came quickly. Several letters Elena had supposedly received had been altered. The information used to question her loyalty had been presented without proper verification. Most importantly, the council had known about Noah's rare hereditary marker before Adrian had been given the complete medical report. Adrian read the findings in silence. For years earlier, he had believed he was protecting the kingdom. Now he understood that he had allowed his fear of political instability to destroy the trust of the woman who had stood beside him. Victoria finally spoke. Your Majesty, everything we did was intended to protect the crown. Adrian looked at her. That is exactly the problem. His voice remained calm. You protected the crown while I failed to protect my family. No one answered. Adrian did not publicly humiliate Victoria. He simply removed her family from royal decisions until an independent review could determine the full truth. Then he did something even more difficult. He refused to issue any order requiring Elena or Noah to return. Weeks later, Adrian traveled back to the mountain town. This time, he arrived without a royal escort. He found Elena outside the cabin, gathering firewood while Noah played nearby in the snow. Adrian stopped several feet away. I came to tell you something, he said. Elena waited. You do not owe me forgiveness. You do not owe me a place in your life. And Noah does not owe me the title of father simply because I am his biological father. Elena studied his face. Then what do you want? Adrian looked toward Noah. The chance to earn the right to be part of his life. Elena remained silent. Adrian continued. If you decide we should never return to the palace, I will accept it. If you decide Noah should grow up here, I will support that choice. If you need time, I will give you time. He placed the royal signet on the wooden fence between them. The crown gave me authority over a kingdom. It never gave me authority over you. Elena looked at the signet, then at Adrian. For years earlier, she had wanted him to choose her without being asked. Now she understood that something had changed. He was no longer asking her to prove that she belonged beside him. He was finally giving her the freedom to decide whether he belonged beside her. Noah approached them with a small wooden puzzle piece in his hand. Mom, I found the last piece. Elena smiled. Adrian watched them together and realized that redemption would not come from one apology or one grand gesture. It would come from every choice he made after this moment. And for the first time, Adrian was willing to let Elena decide whether he deserved another chance. Elena did not answer Adrian that day. She looked at the royal signet resting on the wooden fence, then at Noah playing nearby, and finally at the mountains beyond the cabin. For years earlier, she would have given anything to hear Adrian say that he trusted her. Now, she understood that trust could not be rebuilt by one apology. It had to be earned quietly, one choice at a time. Adrian returned to the capital without asking for an answer. He kept his promise. Weeks became months, and during that time, Elena began receiving letters from him. They were never demands. They never mentioned the crown or the heir. They were simple letters about ordinary things. Adrian told her about a book he had started reading because Noah had once mentioned puzzles. He told her that the palace garden had been redesigned with a small winter section where children could play. He told her that he had asked the council to change the rules surrounding royal children so that no parent could be excluded from important decisions simply because of rank. Elena read every letter but answered only a few. Slowly, she began to notice the difference between the Adrian she remembered and the man he was becoming. One spring morning, Adrian arrived at the cabin again. This time, he brought no documents and no royal symbol. Noah ran toward him with a small wooden puzzle in his hands. I finished it, he said proudly. Adrian smiled. You did? Noah nodded. I want to show you. Elena watched them from the doorway. She could have stopped the moment. Instead, she stepped aside. It was a small gesture, but Adrian understood its meaning. Months later, Elena agreed to visit the capital with Noah. She made one condition. She would not return as a woman seeking approval from the court. She would return as herself. Adrian agreed without hesitation. When they entered the royal palace, the same marble floors and crystal chandeliers surrounded them. The same council members stood along the walls. But Elena was no longer the woman who had walked through those doors 4 years earlier with uncertainty in her heart. She entered with Noah. Beside her and her head held high. Adrian waited at the end of the hall. He did not sit on the throne. He did not command the council to welcome her. He simply looked at Elena and said, "Welcome home." Elena stopped a few feet away. "I do not know if this is home yet." Adrian nodded. "Then we will not call it home until you do." Noah looked between them and smiled. Elena reached for his hand. Then, after a long moment, she looked at Adrian and took one quiet step forward. It was not forgiveness for everything that had happened. It was not a promise that the past would disappear. It was a choice to begin again. The council watched in silence as the Omega who had once been dismissed as unworthy returned on her own terms, and the king who had once believed power could decide everything finally understood that love could never be commanded. Adrian had once believed Elena needed his crown to prove her place beside him. He now knew the truth. She had never needed the crown. She had needed respect. And that day, the king finally learned that losing the woman he loved had not taught him how to rule. It had taught him how to become worthy of the people he called family.